The Xathar fleet loomed on the edge of Earth's orbit, its massive ships cutting through the black void like ancient titans. Captain Varric, the commander of the Xathar fleet, surveyed the human planet from his command center, his eyes cold and dismissive. To him, Earth was a backwater world, nothing more than a primitive colony whose people had no place in the vast cosmic order of the Xathar Empire. "We should strike swiftly," Varric said, his voice harsh, an edge of impatience in his tone. "Their technology is decades behind ours. There is no need to waste time." His advisor, a young officer named Tanis, hesitated. "Sir, the humans have resisted before. Should we not consider their tenacity?" Varric turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "Tenacity is weakness. These humans will crumble like all the others before them. I'll ensure they understand their place in the galaxy." And with that, he gave the command. Across the vast expanse of space, the Xathar's weapons began to charge, dark energy crackling as they prepared for the bombardment. One by one, they fired, unleashing hell on Earth's largest cities, targeting human strongholds, military bases, and civilian areas. The blasts were brutal, catastrophic. In moments, cities like New York, London, and Beijing were reduced to smoking ruins, their inhabitants incinerated in a flash of brilliant light. Humanity had been caught off guard. The Xathar underestimated the speed of their arrival, and most of Earth's defenses were either overwhelmed or completely obliterated. Panic swept through the world. Governments crumbled. There were no safe havens left. And yet, amid the chaos, the human spirit did not break entirely. In the shattered remains of a rebel outpost in the mountains of North America, Commander Lucas Donovan stood over a console, his fingers hovering above a series of keys. His heart pounded in his chest. The reports of destruction were endless, the death toll rising with every passing second. But his resolve had only hardened. "We can't keep running," Donovan muttered under his breath. "Not this time." His team, a diverse group of soldiers and civilians, gathered around him. Each had lost something to the Xathar. Their families, their homes, their entire way of life. The Xathar had underestimated the cost of their cruelty. And now, humanity would fight back. "Donovan, what's the plan?" A gruff voice came from behind him. It was Sergeant Matthews, a seasoned fighter whose weathered face showed the weight of the war. Donovan turned, his expression grim but resolute. "We don't have the resources to face them head-on. Not yet. But we do have one advantage. They think we're weak." He paused, his gaze shifting to the ancient, dusty device sitting on the table before them. A relic they'd discovered hidden beneath the ruins of an old military base, an object of mysterious origin. They didn't fully understand it, but its strange markings and energy pulses told them one thing. It held power. The artifact had been dormant for centuries, a forgotten relic from a time before the Xathar Empire's rise. Humanity's ancient ancestors had hidden it away, leaving only cryptic notes about its true nature. In their desperation, the rebels had unearthed it, hoping for some edge, some weapon that could turn the tide. "We activate this," Donovan said, his voice low but filled with fierce determination, "and we show them exactly what humans are capable of." The room fell silent as the team looked at the device. No one knew what would happen when they activated it, but in that moment, they all knew they had no other choice. Outside, the first tremors of the human rebellion began to stir. As the Xathar fleet loomed over Earth, expecting easy victory, the humans were preparing to prove just how wrong they were. The artifact hummed with an eerie, almost unnatural energy. Donovan's hands trembled slightly as he activated the device. A low thrum filled the room, growing louder by the second. The air around them seemed to distort, as if the very fabric of reality was bending in response to the device's activation. There was a brief, unsettling silence, followed by a sudden surge of power that sent shockwaves through the building. Donovan's team staggered back as an intense burst of light erupted from the artifact, flooding the room in an iridescent glow. The energy crackled around them, forming swirling patterns in the air like a force they could barely comprehend. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Time itself held its breath. "What the hell is this?" Matthews gasped, his voice hoarse as he shielded his eyes from the light. The device began to pulse in rhythm with the hearts of those in the room, its power resonating with their emotions, specifically their anger, grief, and determination. Donovan felt it first, an almost indescribable surge of energy rushing through him. His thoughts became sharper, his senses heightened. But it wasn't just him. The others around him were experiencing it too. "I feel stronger," Sergeant Matthews muttered, looking down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. His veins seemed to glow with the same pulsing energy as the artifact. The entire room had become a maelstrom of energy, swirling in the air like a force of nature. Donovan could feel his own anger rising, a deep primal rage that had been building ever since the Xathar had destroyed their cities, slaughtered their people, and driven them into hiding. The loss, the helplessness, it all boiled to a breaking point, fueling the power coursing through him. Then it hit him. The power wasn't just strength, it was something more. The artifact was amplifying their emotions, their will to fight, and channeling it into a force far beyond what they had ever imagined. Humanity's raw potential was suddenly unleashed. He clenched his fists, feeling the energy crackle in the air. "We can use this," he said, voice low but determined. "We've been fighting the Xathar with scraps, with outdated tech, but now we have something they'll never understand." The team nodded, their faces filled with awe and excitement. They had no idea how the artifact worked, no understanding of the full scope of its power. But they knew one thing. It was their ticket to victory. Outside, the chaos of the Xathar invasion continued. Cities were burning. Thousands of humans were still being rounded up and taken to labor camps, and the Xathar continued their march, certain they would crush any remaining resistance. But as Donovan and his team harnessed the power of the artifact, they knew the tables were about to turn. That night, they made their first strike. Donovan's team, armed with nothing but their newfound abilities and basic weaponry, infiltrated a Xathar supply base in the ruins of New York. The base was heavily guarded, and the Xathar soldiers, mechanical enforcers, and energy shields would have made it impossible to breach, except for the human anger now coursing through their veins. In a flash, Matthews hurled a piece of debris at a wall, the force of his throw so intense that it caused the entire structure to collapse. The Xathar soldiers inside scrambled to respond, but they were no match for the humans now powered by their emotions. Donovan led the charge, his hands crackling with energy as he fired blasts of pure force at the enemy. Each strike sent the Xathar soldiers flying, their bodies collapsing under the pressure of human fury. "Move!" Donovan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team pushed forward, using their newfound powers to tear through the enemy lines with astonishing speed. The Xathar were caught completely off guard. In the heart of the base, Donovan found what they came for, a powerful Xathar communication device. They destroyed it in seconds, sending a message across the galaxy. Humanity is not weak. The message was clear. The Xathar were not fighting a broken, defenseless species. They were facing something far more dangerous. They were facing humanity's wrath. The humans, fueled by a power that Xathar could never understand, had begun their rebellion in earnest. The first battle had been a victory, but it was just the beginning. The taste of victory was still fresh on their lips when Donovan and his team received reports of the Xathar retaliating in full force. The message they had sent had stirred something in the Xathar, a realization that humanity wasn't as fragile as they had assumed. But instead of retreating, the Xathar Empire launched a brutal counteroffensive, intensifying their attacks on human strongholds across the galaxy. The Xathar, now angry and desperate to maintain control, began razing entire cities, turning once thriving colonies into ash. Each strike was more devastating than the last, as they focused not just on military targets, but on civilian populations, attempting to break the human will once and for all. But the harder they struck, the fiercer the humans became. In a makeshift command center deep within the Arctic Circle, Donovan's team gathered around a holographic map, their faces grim. "We've taken down a few bases, but the Xathar aren't going to back off," Donovan said, slamming his fist onto the table, his voice filled with frustration. "They're coming for us all now." Matthews, ever the pragmatist, looked over the reports. "They'd got us cornered. Earth's defenses are barely holding. They're committing all their forces to break us. What's our next move?" Donovan's eyes hardened. "We strike before they do. If we don't, we'll be nothing more than a memory." The room fell silent as the team absorbed his words. They knew what it meant. Another mission, another dangerous assault against impossible odds. But there was no turning back now. The fire had been lit, and humanity would not go down quietly. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, a fleet of Xathar warships hovered ominously over the ruins of a once bustling city in Central America. The population had been all but wiped out, but the Xathar were relentless. Their goal was simple: crush the remaining resistance and take control of Earth. Commander Thrax, the ruthless leader of the Xathar fleet, stood before his holographic display, his pale eyes burning with cold calculation. "We will burn their spirit as we burn their cities," he muttered. "Humanity has made a mistake in resisting us. Let them see the full extent of our wrath." He turned to his subordinate. "Prepare the Annihilator. We'll end this once and for all." The Annihilator was the Xathar's ultimate weapon, capable of wiping entire star systems from existence. Donovan knew that if they didn't act now, Earth might be next on the target list. Back in the Rebel Command Center, the urgency of the situation was becoming clear. The artifact's energy had unlocked more than just their powers. It had connected them to something much deeper, something vast and untapped. Humanity's anger had always been a driving force, but now it was becoming a weapon of unimaginable power. Donovan, Matthews, and the rest of the team suited up in their tactical gear, their resolve set. They had to get to the heart of the Xathar's operations, destroy their superweapon, and make it clear that humanity would never kneel to anyone, especially not to a race of conquerors that thought they could break them. "Remember, this isn't just for us," Donovan said, his voice heavy with the weight of what they were about to do. "This is for every person who's been taken, every world destroyed. We show them what happens when you push humanity too far." The mission was a perilous one. They would have to infiltrate one of the most heavily fortified Xathar facilities on the planet, deep inside a mountain range that had been transformed into a war zone. But if they succeeded, they would gain a key advantage, one that could turn the tide in their favor. As the team embarked on their assault, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. Xathar warships cruised above, casting shadows over the ruins. The human rebels moved like ghosts, using their newfound powers to remain undetected as they slipped through enemy lines. The Xathar were everywhere, their cold, emotionless faces a stark contrast to the fierce passion driving the humans forward. Inside the Xathar facility, chaos erupted as Donovan's team launched their attack. Matthews, now able to manipulate energy with a simple gesture, tore through enemy soldiers with brutal efficiency. Donovan himself was a whirlwind of fury, his mind and body moving faster than he had ever thought possible as he ripped through Xathar forces, his raw rage manifesting in deadly bursts of energy. The humans had found their true strength, and the Xathar, who had once thought them insignificant, were now realizing just how wrong they had been. As the battle raged on, Donovan's heart pounded in his chest. Every strike, every blast, every explosion fueled their desire for vengeance. The Xathar had taken so much from them, and now they would pay. "We're not done yet," Donovan muttered to himself, pushing forward with everything he had. They had no choice but to win. There was no going back. This was war. And the blood of their enemies would mark the beginning of the end for the Xathar Empire. The first wave of humanity's retaliation had shaken the Xathar Empire to its core. But as devastating as their attacks had been, they were only the beginning. The rebels had struck swiftly and decisively, hitting Xathar supply lines, military strongholds, and key communication hubs. And each victory was amplified by the strange, overwhelming power they had discovered within themselves. With every battle, the humans grew more dangerous, their rage evolving into a weapon unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Back on Earth, Donovan and his team huddled in the dimly lit command center, their faces illuminated by the flickering holographic maps and reports. The war had escalated quickly, and it was clear that the Xathar were scrambling to respond. But there was no going back now. Humanity had awoken, and it was not going to retreat. "We've done it," Matthews said, his voice low and filled with awe. "We've cracked their defenses. They're in chaos." Donovan looked over the latest intel, his mind racing. The Xathar's once impregnable fleets were now in disarray. Entire battalions were cut off from their command. Rebels on distant colonies were coordinating strikes without the Xathar being able to respond quickly enough. It was as if the Xathar's superiority had become their greatest weakness. They were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. "That's because they don't understand us," Donovan muttered, shaking his head. "They see us as weak, as savages, but the truth is, humanity's greatest strength is in our ability to adapt, to survive against the odds. They didn't count on us using our rage to fight back." But as the humans celebrated their growing victories, something darker loomed. The Xathar, now desperate, had resorted to their most extreme option, the Annihilator, a weapon that could erase entire star systems, obliterating them from existence in the blink of an eye. Commander Thrax had unleashed it on several rebel outposts, using its devastating power to wipe out entire colonies in a brutal attempt to break human morale. Yet the more the Xathar lashed out, the more furious humanity became. Each loss was met with a renewed sense of vengeance. The fires of their anger only grew hotter. Their drive for survival became something primal, unstoppable. But even so, the weight of war was beginning to take its toll. As Donovan's team watched the destruction unfold on the holoscreens, a chill of uncertainty ran through them. The Annihilator was a threat unlike anything they had faced, and if Thrax unleashed it fully, there might be nothing left to fight for. "We have to stop it," Donovan said, his voice quiet but resolute. "If we don't, Earth is next." Matthews nodded. "We can't let them use that weapon to wipe out entire systems. If it comes to Earth, we won't have a chance." "We don't have the luxury of waiting," Donovan replied. "We strike fast. We find the Annihilator, and we destroy it." The plan was risky, but it was the only option left. The Xathar's fleet had grown exponentially, and now it was a race against time. The Annihilator was located deep within the heart of Xathar Prime, their heavily fortified homeworld. It was a place where every inch was guarded by the fiercest Xathar warriors, with hundreds of layers of defense. Getting in would be near impossible. But Donovan knew this war was no longer about military might. It was about something more, the human will to survive, to protect what they had left, and to show the galaxy that they would not be silenced. The galaxy, once dominated by the Xathar, now trembled at the prospect of human wrath. The Xathar had underestimated humanity's ability to endure, to rise from the ashes of their devastation, and to turn their fury into strength. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were the storm. The stars above Xathar Prime burned a cold, indifferent white as Donovan's team descended through the planet's atmosphere. The mission was no longer a simple raid for supplies or sabotage. It had grown into humanity's final chance to turn the tide. The Annihilator loomed over them like a grim reaper, a weapon of unfathomable destruction, capable of wiping out entire star systems in a flash. If they didn't succeed, Earth and everything they'd fought for would be nothing but dust. As the shuttle punched through the atmosphere, a heavy silence fell over the crew. Each of them had lost something: family, friends, homes, But they had gained something more, a burning need for vengeance and a relentless desire to survive. The artifact had awakened something deep within them, turning their rage into a force that now crackled through the air like electricity. "We've been through worse," Matthews said, his voice steady but tight, trying to break the tension. "We've survived against the odds before. We can do it again." Donovan glanced at him, his jaw clenched. "This time, it's different. We're fighting for everything. For the future of humanity." The shuttle finally broke through the clouds, revealing the sprawling landscape of Sathar Prime below. It was an industrial wasteland, a world consumed by the Empire's endless war machine. Towering spires of black metal stretched into the sky, surrounded by fortress-like structures and a labyrinth of tunnels that snaked beneath the surface. "Coordinates locked in," Donovan said, his fingers flying over the console. "Landing zone secured. We're dropping in under the radar. Keep your heads down, and remember, our objective is the Annihilator. Nothing else." The shuttle lurched as it landed in a shadowed canyon. The moment the door opened, a wave of hot, oppressive air blasted through the cabin. The harsh terrain was alien to them. Jagged rocks, deep ravines, and the eerie silence of an industrial world that seemed to suffocate under the weight of its own destruction. With a deep breath, Donovan led the charge, his team following closely behind. They moved swiftly, blending into the shadows, their steps calculated. Every inch of Sathar Prime was a deadly maze of traps and sentries, but the artifact's power coursed through them, sharpening their senses, amplifying their instincts. As they navigated the craggy terrain, they encountered their first obstacle: Sathar sentries patrolling a narrow pass. The soldiers, towering and armored, moved methodically, scanning for intruders. But the humans, now more than just soldiers, they were predators, watched patiently, waiting for the perfect moment. Matthews, his hand crackling with energy, made the first move. A burst of raw force struck the lid sentry, knocking it off its feet. Before the others could react, Donovan's team closed in with lightning speed, dispatching the remaining sentries in a flurry of brutal efficiency. The Sathar didn't even have time to sound an alarm. "We're getting close," Donovan said, wiping the sweat from his brow. His eyes were focused, scanning the path ahead. The Annihilator's energy signature was faint, hidden deep beneath the planet's surface in a massive underground complex. Their journey took them through miles of hostile terrain, but the further they went, the more the gravity of their mission weighed on them. The deeper into the Sathar stronghold they traveled, the more the stakes grew. If they failed here, humanity's fight for survival would come to an end. By the time they reached the entrance to the Annihilator's underground complex, they were on high alert. The facility was heavily guarded, a vast complex of walls and turrets, but Donovan's team was not deterred. They had already broken through more fortified defenses, and now they stood on the cusp of what could be their most dangerous challenge yet. As they crept closer to the complex's entrance, a faint hum filled the air, an eerie, almost imperceptible vibration. It was the signature of the Annihilator, pulsing with unimaginable energy. The device was close, and with it, their final chance to strike a decisive blow against the Sathar. Donovan glanced at his team, his expression determined. This is it. No turning back now. The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. They weren't alone. The shadows around them stirred as the sound of footsteps grew louder. Donovan's instincts kicked in, and he motioned for the team to halt. They pressed themselves against the cold, jagged walls of the underground tunnel, waiting in silence. The hum of the Annihilator grew louder, its pulse vibrating through the walls, a constant reminder of the destruction it was capable of unleashing. Seconds felt like hours as the footsteps approached. Donovan's grip tightened on his weapon, the raw energy coursing through his veins, making him more aware of every movement, every sound. They couldn't afford to be discovered now. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall, imposing, and wearing the familiar black armor of the Sathar elite. It was a patrol of one, but the soldier was no ordinary guard. This was a Sathar hunter, a specialized unit trained to detect and neutralize intruders with deadly precision. Its helmet glinted in the dim light as it scanned the corridor with a sharp mechanical gaze. Donovan held his breath, waiting for the hunter to pass. But the Xathar's head turned slightly, sensing something amiss. A brief, chilling pause. "Move," Donovan hissed under his breath, and with a swift motion, he leaped from his position. Matthews and the others followed, closing the distance in seconds. The Xathar hunter raised its weapon just as Donovan's team descended on it. Matthews fired first, sending a wave of energy crackling through the air. The blast hit the hunter square in the chest, throwing it back against the wall. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The Xathar soldier's armor absorbed the blow, and it staggered back to its feet, drawing its blade in a flash. Before it could react further, Donovan was on it, his own blade flashing through the air in a fluid motion, a lethal strike born from years of training and fury. The hunter's armor crumpled beneath the blow, and its helmet exploded in a shower of sparks as Donovan's weapon pierced through its skull. The Xathar soldier crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Breathing heavily, Donovan wiped his blade clean and nodded toward Matthews, who gave him a sharp nod in return. "That was too close," Matthews muttered, his voice gruff. "We can't keep fighting these things like this. We need to get to the annihilator." Donovan took a deep breath and motioned for the team to move forward. The patrol had been a warning, a reminder that the Xathar were everywhere, and every second they spent in this complex brought them closer to discovery. The corridor widened into a massive circular chamber, and at the center stood the annihilator. It was as imposing as its reputation, an enormous pulsing device embedded into the heart of the complex, surrounded by layers of energy shields and armed guards. The hum of its power filled the air, a low, vibrating growl that seemed to shake the very foundation of the planet. It was here, at the center of the Xathar Empire's power, that the final battle would unfold. "We've made it," Donovan whispered, but there was no time to celebrate. They could hear the distant rumble of approaching reinforcements. More Xathar soldiers, more of the elite hunters that had been sent to protect the weapon. The clock was ticking. "Ready yourself," Donovan ordered. "This is it. We destroy the annihilator, or we die trying." Matthews turned to the others, his expression fierce. "For Earth. For everyone we've lost." With that, they moved into position. Donovan and Matthews flanked the left side, while the rest of the team spread out, covering the perimeter. Their plan was simple: disable the shields surrounding the annihilator, plant explosives, and get out before the entire facility collapsed. Easier said than done. As they neared the base of the device, a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the chamber, causing the air to crackle with energy. "Intruders detected. Extermination protocol initiated." The annihilator's defenses flared to life. Energy shields sprang up around it, forming an impenetrable barrier. Simultaneously, dozens of Xathar soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons drawn, their armor gleaming with lethal intent. "Shit," Matthews cursed, taking cover behind a pillar. "We're not going to get in without a fight." Without hesitation, Donovan raised his hand, unleashing a blast of concentrated energy. The force of the strike sent several Xathar soldiers flying back, but they quickly recovered, their weapons firing in retaliation. The room erupted into chaos as gunfire, blasts of energy, and sparks of light filled the chamber. The humans were outnumbered, but their fury and the raw power from the artifact surged through them. Donovan, Matthews, and the others moved with precision, taking down Xathar soldiers one by one. They were fast, relentless, and fueled by a rage that the Xathar couldn't comprehend. Donovan's mind raced as he moved to a console near the base of the annihilator, his fingers flying over the controls. The energy shields were thick, but not indestructible. If he could disable the shields, they could destroy the weapon once and for all. As his fingers danced over the interface, a loud explosion shook the ground beneath him, and a wall of fire erupted in front of him. A group of Xathar soldiers had breached their flank. The battle was far from over. The chamber exploded into chaos as the Sather soldiers surged forward, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Donovan's pulse raced, the sheer volume of gunfire deafening as his team scrambled for cover. The annihilator loomed just ahead, its pulsing energy shield a constant reminder of the ticking clock. There was no time to waste. "Keep moving," Donovan shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. His team responded immediately, pressing forward despite the storm of gunfire that rained down on them. Matthews and the others provided cover fire, their weapons unleashing torrents of energy that lit up the chamber in bursts of blinding light. But for every Sather they felled, two more seemed to take their place. The sheer number of enemies made it impossible to keep up, and the room was closing in on them with every passing second. Donovan's gaze shifted to the base of the annihilator. The energy shield was flickering, but still unyielding. His fingers hovered over the control console, his mind calculating the risks. He needed to disable the shield, but the console was heavily guarded. There was no way he could reach it without a distraction. "Matthews," Donovan called out, his voice urgent. "Create a diversion. I need a minute." Matthews, grinning in the face of the chaos, nodded sharply. "Got it." Without another word, Matthews sprinted into the open, drawing the attention of the Sather soldiers. He unleashed a blast of concentrated energy that sent a shockwave through the room, throwing several soldiers off their feet. As the Sather scrambled to regroup, Matthews ducked behind a pillar, continuing to fire and keep them distracted. His movements were erratic, unpredictable, exactly what Donovan needed. Taking a deep breath, Donovan bolted for the console, sprinting as fast as his legs would carry him. Every step felt like an eternity, each heartbeat pounding in his ears. The world blurred around him as he reached the base of the annihilator, diving behind a slab of reinforced metal for cover. His fingers flew over the controls, trying to decrypt the Sather interface. Sweat poured down his face as he worked furiously, the minutes feeling like hours. He could hear the crackle of Sather weapons and the shouts of their soldiers closing in. But he focused solely on the task in front of him. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Finally, with a burst of static and a flash of light, the console beeped in acknowledgement. The shield flickered once, and then, finally, collapsed. "Shields down," Donovan yelled, the words barely leaving his lips before the team surged forward, their weapons now fully capable of piercing the Sather defenses. Matthews, hearing the signal, turned and fired another blast into the enemy ranks, clearing a path for the others. The rest of the team charged forward, their weapons cutting down Sather soldiers in a blur of motion. But even as they pushed forward, Donovan could feel the weight of what lay ahead. The annihilator still had to be destroyed, and that would take time. Time they didn't have. A loud screech filled the air as a massive Sather war machine appeared from the far side of the chamber, a towering mechanical behemoth with thick armor plating and an array of weaponry that made the standard soldiers look like children. The monster's guns roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy that sent shockwaves through the room. "Fall back," Donovan ordered, his voice hoarse as he dove behind a stack of debris. The team followed suit, narrowly avoiding the blasts that tore through the walls around them. "We can't let it get closer to the annihilator," Matthews shouted, firing a concentrated energy burst at the war machine. The shot hit its armor but only left a minor dent. It wasn't enough. Donovan's mind raced. There had to be another way. A shot of adrenaline surged through his veins as he realized what they needed to do. He had to get close enough to plant the explosives on the annihilator, and Matthews had to take down that war machine. "Matthews," Donovan yelled. "I need cover. I'm planting the charges." "On it," Matthews responded immediately, charging toward the war machine with his rifle raised. As he fired, Donovan sprinted toward the annihilator, his heart pounding in his chest. The war machine's heavy cannons fired again, but Matthews' fire was relentless, forcing the beast to stagger back. Reaching the base of the annihilator, Donovan dropped to his knees and activated the explosive charges, his hands moving with surgical precision. Each second was a risk. He could feel the heat from the war machine's fire and the heavy footsteps of the Sather soldiers closing in. Explosives planted, Donovan shouted over his shoulder. Get ready. As he sprinted back toward his team, the war machine roared with fury. Matthew's blasts finally found their mark, ripping through the war machine's central power core. The mechanical giant trembled, then lurched violently before exploding in a burst of fire and shrapnel. Time's up, Donovan yelled. The team sprinted toward the exit, leaving the carnage behind. The explosion rocked the entire chamber. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the massive war machine crumpled in on itself, sending debris flying in every direction. Donovan's team had barely cleared the blast radius when the shockwave hit, throwing them off balance and forcing them to dive for cover. Go, 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 Donovan shouted, scrambling to his feet and sprinting toward the narrow exit tunnel they had entered through. The hum of the annihilator's energy began to intensify again as the explosives they planted started to activate, but there was no time to watch it crumble. Their only focus now was getting out before the entire complex came down around them. Behind them, the facility was starting to shake violently. The blast had set off a chain reaction. The annihilator, despite its immense power, was weakening, and the entire underground structure was beginning to collapse under its own weight. Matthews was the first to reach the exit, firing a final shot at a group of approaching Sather soldiers who had managed to regroup. The blast hit with a satisfying thud, knocking the enemy back. But they weren't finished yet. The Sather soldiers began to push forward again, more determined than ever, knowing that if they lost the annihilator, they'd lose the war. Donovan, we're not going to make it if we don't move faster. Matthews yelled over his shoulder, the sound of Sather boots growing louder with every passing second. The team pressed forward, the sound of their heavy boots echoing off the walls as they sprinted through the crumbling complex. Sparks flew from damaged electrical panels, and the sound of collapsing metal and cracking stone reverberated through the tunnel. Time was running out. We're almost there, Donovan yelled, the entrance to the surface just ahead. But as they neared the exit, they were met by another wave of Sather reinforcements. A dozen soldiers, led by a towering Sather commander, blocked their path. The commander's armor gleamed with polished black metal, and his eyes burned with cold fury beneath his helmet. Your resistance is futile, the commander said, his voice a low growl as he raised a heavy energy rifle. You will not leave this place alive. Donovan's heart raced. They were so close, only a few more meters to freedom. But with the commander's forces blocking the way, their escape was looking impossible. Hold your ground, Donovan shouted to his team. Cover me. Without waiting for a response, Donovan dashed forward, using the smoke and debris to conceal his movement. He could hear the crackle of energy blasts behind him, but he pushed forward with everything he had, driven by the thought of Earth and what was at stake. The commander's rifle fired, narrowly missing him by inches. The team followed, suppressing the enemy's fire with precise shots as Donovan neared the final stretch. Sweat poured down his face, his muscles aching from the relentless battle. He could feel the heat from the collapsing facility bearing down on them like a beast ready to devour them whole. With a final, desperate push, Donovan reached the exit and hurled himself into the open air, landing hard on the rocky surface outside the complex. The sky above was streaked with the glow of distant stars, a sharp contrast to the fire and chaos of the underground war zone. He looked back just in time to see Matthews and the rest of the team burst from the tunnel behind him, their weapons raised and ready. But the explosion was already happening. The Annihilator's power core, having taken the full brunt of their assault, erupted in a blinding flash. The shockwave sent the team sprawling, the force of the blast knocking them off their feet. The earth beneath them shook violently, sending rocks tumbling from the cliffs around them. For a moment, everything went silent. The debris hung in the air like smoke, and the ground trembled beneath them. Then the distant rumble of collapsing structures reached their ears, and they realized that Sather Empire's most devastating weapon was no more. "We did it," Matthews breathed, his voice in disbelief. "We actually did it." But there was no time for celebration. The Cathar would not go down easily. Though the Annihilator had been destroyed, the war was far from over. The humans had struck a powerful blow, but they knew they were still outnumbered and outgunned. And yet, in that moment, Donovan allowed himself a rare flicker of hope. "The war's not over," Donovan said, his voice low but determined. "But we've sent them a message. Humanity will not bow. We fight for our future." As they regrouped and set their sights back toward the horizon, the faint sound of distant Sather ships could be heard in the sky above. They had won this battle, but the galaxy was vast, and the war would continue. There was still much to be done. But as the light of the dying Annihilator flickered behind them, humanity had shown the universe one undeniable truth. They were not a species to be underestimated.